So good afternoon, and it's really great to be with you this afternoon. I'm very glad for the members of the Parliament who are hosting us this afternoon, and it's good to see that we have such a great turnout. I mean, it's almost a full house, and I think this shows the importance of this topic. But also this shows the timeliness of this topic. It's very timely that we discuss it now. And for me, actually, something that is very important is that you decided not to talk about the Christians of the Middle East, but to talk to them. That's very important. It's not done everywhere. And so I'm going to share with you today my own perspective, and I think there should be enough time for questions after that. And I will just share with you my own perspective. It might be a bit different than what you expect, but this is good. So it will not be boring. And it might be challenging for the one or the other, but that's okay. So we'll have an even better debate. What I thought I would like to do is maybe to put the whole question in context. And so this is the first part. And secondly, I would like to ask the question, what is the role of Christians in the Arab world, in the Middle East? So let me start with the context. As contextual theologian, this is how I work usually. I have 5 points, so you can follow easily in the first part and 5 points in the second. So I will start with the first point. You know, the whole issue of, there is an important question, is, are Christians in the Middle East a minority or not? This is a very much debated question. Maybe for you here, immediately you think Christians are a minority, but for the Christians in the Middle East, that is not very clear. Because I think in the West, when you talk about minority, it's usually racial minorities, often. People maybe who come from a different culture. They might speak a different language. They might have different customs. But Christians in the Middle East are part and parcel of the society. It's the same language, the same customs. We share almost everything except religion. And so, are we a minority? Many Christians would say, no, we are not a minority. But then you have another group of Christians who are against using the term minority because they are saying, you know, often also minorities, they are migrants from a different place. And Christians in the Middle East, you know, we have been there before Islam. So calling the Christian a minority is like discriminating against them. This is how we sometimes see it. And the third group, who are against the use of minority for Christians, they think the more we use the term minority for Christians, the more we are weakening them. Because instead of strengthening the civil society and the concept of a civil society, we go back to a sectarian language. And when it comes to sectarian language, Christians are on the weaker end. And so this is why I think for you here, it might be very obvious to talk about Christians as a minority. For us there, actually many of us, not all, but many of us are fighting the use of minority for Christians. So that's the first point I would like to make. The second point, when we talk about the Arab Spring, usually we forget Israel. But please do not forget Israel. Why? Because if you look at most of the dictators in the Arab world, they came almost the same time with the Israeli occupation. So Arab dictatorship and Israeli occupation are two sides of the same medal. Again, this is not how people here are used to see the things. They think, Arabs, they have all of these dictators, but Israel is the democracy. Israel might be a democracy within Israel, but when it comes to the West Bank, Israel is a military occupation. And all the symptoms of dictatorship in the Arab world are found in the Israeli occupation. Security state, corruption, oppressing people, no equality. I mean, everything actually that you think are there in the Arab countries, you will find in the Israeli occupation. And for me, actually, we cannot and we should not separate the whole issue of occupation from the Arab Spring, because in fact, there can be no spring in the Arab world without ending the Israeli occupation. This is very, very, very important. Because if you look at our situation, actually, even if we have democracy in the whole Arab world and we have the Israeli-Palestinian problem still there, the whole region cannot think of development of the future because they are very much busy with this conflict. And so please do not forget Israel. And especially nowadays, actually, because I think right now Israel is trying actually to say that the situation of Christians in Israel or in the West Bank is better than that of the Arab state. This is a myth. In fact, we have a book coming out next week that exactly talks about this myth. The third point I would like to make is that I'm also hesitant to talk about Christian persecution in the Middle East. So the word persecution is something that I would not use. Because I don't think in the majority of the Arab world Christians are persecuted as such. Again, maybe this is not what you came to hear from me, but again, it's good to be challenged a bit. Because I think we have to see the whole context. And the whole context is basically in the whole Arab world, including Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, there is no democracy. There are no democratic structures. There are no civil society. And yes, Christians have not, like the freedom of religion fully, but, remember, we are living in a context where we do not have freedom full stop. Not only freedom of religion. I mean, there is no freedom. And in that sense, you will have contexts where Shiites are actually oppressed by Sunni. They are not Christians. They are actually Muslims. Or Sunnis oppressed by Alawites. Again, all Muslims, And so I wouldn't really talk about Christian persecution. I would more talk about that we are living in a context where there is no freedom yet. And this is different than persecution. Persecution, it means Christians are actually oppressed because of their religion, because of their faith in Jesus Christ. I doubt that this is the case actually anywhere, maybe with the exception of Saudi Arabia. And the fifth point, that was the third point, sorry. The fourth point I would like to make is on the issue of protecting a minority. You know, there are some Christians in the Middle East who are running to the West, calling for them to come and protect us. Now, there are actually two kinds of protection myths in the Arab world. The first is that I talked about just right now, the idea of Western countries coming to protect us. I don't believe in that. For the simple reason, because history tells me exactly the opposite. History tells me actually is that it was often the Western world who let the Christian down. Again, this is not what you came maybe here to hear, but I think this is important. You know, I remember reading a letter of an Armenian, 1914, published in a Swiss newspaper, asking the Germans how could they keep silence when so many Armenians were massacred. The answer is very easy. The political interests of Germany at that time were much more important than the future of the Armenians. So that Armenian had the feeling the Germans let him down. Think of all the promises that England gave to the Arabs to rebel against the Ottomans. None of these promises were kept. The only promise that was kept was the promise to Israel to have a national homeland, not for the Christians. Or think of Saudi Arabia. You know, I always tell when I go to meet with political parties, you know, I tell them I will start believing in you once you go to Saudi Arabia and you tell them, why aren't you allowing the building of churches? But you know what? Oil is more important than the Christians. And so please don't come to us and say, you know, we want to protect you, because our experience is telling us, actually the West all along has been protecting their own interest. Another good example is Iraq. You know, once George W. Bush Jr. brought democracy to Iraq, half of the Christians left. And this is by President Bush, who is very much affiliated with the Christian right. So I tell always our people, do not fall in the trap of this Western myth. But also, back home, I always say, we don't want as Christians to be protected. You know, there are sometimes the Muslim Brotherhood, they tell, you know, we will protect you. And they put their hands like this. I say, I don't want that protection. The protection actually we are fighting for is a protection of a legal system. That is the only protection that should be allowed. And so a state with a legal system, and this is why for me, the rights of Christians cannot be but human rights. So if we protect the human rights, we are actually automatically protecting the rights of Christians. So we are not asking for special rights, because this will be actually against the whole concept of human rights. And the fifth point, we live in a region actually that is not poor, but has poor policies. And these are two different things. If you look at our region, actually, it's not poor, but the policies are very poor. Why? We live in a context where every year the region is spending $1 trillion on weapons. We are the largest importer of weapons worldwide. Imagine $1 trillion, not billion, $1 trillion every year. In the last 10 years, $10 trillion on weapons. Who is benefiting from all of this? Not the people of the region. And you know, the funny thing, most of the time, these governments are not using any of these weapons but against their own people, except for Israel. And Israel is part of the equation. As long as Israel gets all of these toys for free, people in the region, they think they have to spend more to keep up with Israel. So Israel is basically giving incentives for the region to buy more weapons from the West. This is poor policy. Remember, $1 trillion for weapons, and yet we have the highest illiteracy rate in the whole world, 35.6% illiteracy in our region. If you spend so much money on weapons, you will not have enough focus on education. By the way, worldwide, the average of illiteracy is like 18%. So the Middle East has doubled the percentage of illiteracy. The same is true for unemployment. I mean, all of this is a vicious circle, you know. All of this has to do with the context. So we cannot not talk about it, because we are part of this whole system. Unemployment rate, in the next 8 years, our region has to generate 50 million new job opportunities. The challenge for any government that will be elected now is really not the election. The elections are easily won, but the challenge is how can you create jobs for people? Because, you know, if people are illiterate and if people are unemployed and if people are living under a security state, there is no future for Christians. Which means the future of Christians can only be secured if we secure the development of the region as such. That is very, very important.